everybody. This is Johns Hopkins with Baltimore Heritage, and it's May 26th, Tuesday after Memorial Day, and we are back in week 9 with our 5-minute histories videos. Welcome back to my living room in Bolton Hill, and today we're going to talk about two businesses that for over 100 years have helped build Baltimore. But before we get into it, I just have to say a special thanks to a gentleman named Richard Messick. Richard comes in and volunteers with us, researching and writing stories about businesses that have helped build Baltimore for over 100 years. So the material I'm going to talk about today comes from him. Thanks, Richard. All right, you cannot start talking about old businesses in Baltimore without starting with G. Krug and Son Iron Works, the nation's oldest operating iron works company, located on Saratoga Street, just north of Lexington Market. It's been in the same building since 1810. It's kind of amazing the building hasn't burned down. They have been forging and smashing and welding and using all sorts of hot things for over 200 years, and they're still doing it in the same space. In fact, they have a history museum there as well, and when we were allowed to do it, I urge you to go. It is like stepping back into time. It is fantastic. But G. Krug got it started in 1810. A gentleman named Augustus Schwartz came over as a blacksmith and started blacksmithing there. By 1830, a gentleman named Merker was there, and this is kind of an interesting insight in history. He was doing locksmithing and forging bells for churches. And that was 1830. In 1830, Baltimore's population was booming, and apparently we had a bunch of churchgoers coming into Baltimore. We needed more church bells, but we also had a bunch of ne'er-do-wells who were breaking into houses, so we needed a locksmith as well. It's kind of an interesting little insight into what was going on in the 1830s. But by 1848, Gustavus Krug comes over and takes over the business, and they have been going strong for over 150 years. Today, operated by the 5th generation of Krugs, Peter Krug and a bunch of his wonderful colleagues. Some of the works that they have done that you'll know: the fence around the Washington Monument, the fence around the original Hopkins Hospital, the fence around Otterbein Church in South Baltimore. These would make a great thing if you're driving around in your car. Go take a look and see if you can see some similarities. The Otterbein fence, in fact, they did not use some pattern in a book. They created their own pattern, and it's become kind of well known. The Otterbein fence from G. Krug, you can see it all over Baltimore. And in fact, there's a wonderful fence in my neighborhood that's on Landvale Street that's Otterbein style. And if you want to sound super cool, you can walk with a bunch of your friends down Landvale Street in Bolton Hill looking at various things, and then casually pass by this fence and say, oh yeah, that's an Otterbein style fence from G. Krug. It's probably 100 years old. And you'll sound really like you know what you're talking about. G. Krug has been going for since 1810 in that same spot. And one funny story is that in addition to the big monumental works, a number of smaller things like window boxes and window grates were also theirs. And about 10 years ago, when the Ivy Hotel was being restored, the Azola companies were the ones doing it, and they were missing some of the ironworks around their windows, their sort of first floor windows. So they walked over to G. Krug and they said, well, do you think you could make something that looks kind of appropriate, like it would have been here when this building was built around 1900? And Peter Krug said, well, what's the address? And they gave him the address. He went back into his office and he came back with this sort of parchment paper looking thing, and he said, well, I think we can not only make you something that looks appropriate, we can make you something that was actually there in the beginning. Here are the designs. We did the original one. So if you want to go over to the Ivy Hotel on Biddle and Calvert Street, take a look at the grates on the windows and try to tell which ones are 100 years old and which ones are 5 years old. I bet you can't. All right, we're going to jump along to the second company we want to talk about, which is Hilgartner Stone. Hilgartner Stone got its start in 1863, so just before during the Civil War. And a gentleman named Ludwig Hilgartner came over from Germany, a stone cutter, and built up the company so that by 1900 they had a 30 horsepower stone cutting machine, and they were cutting Baltimore County marble to make columns and floors for things like the Baltimore Museum of Art, the Walters Art Gallery, sculptures in Greenmount Cemetery. But by far their best known items were the marble steps that Baltimore has and that we love fondly. Odds are, if you're looking at a row of marble steps, odds are high that those came from Hilgartner Stone. They were doing so well, they opened offices in Chicago and in Los Angeles. They had a buyer in Carrara, Italy, so that when they needed the world's finest marble, they had someone to procure it for them. But the Depression in the 1930s hit them hard, and they closed all of their other offices. Just their Baltimore office remained open. And by 1970, they were kind of struggling away, making small pieces, but not any big projects for the most part. But one of the things they were making is, instead of big marble steps, they were making diminutive marble steps, little tiny guys that you could use to prop your door open so it wouldn't blow shut. And in 1976, the city fair, if those of you of a certain age may remember the city fairs, they were selling them at the city fair, and they became so popular that people started ordering them to celebrate things like bar mitzvahs and weddings and births. What a better way to celebrate the birth of a granddaughter, a Baltimore granddaughter, than with a Baltimore mini marble step. And in fact, if I ever have a granddaughter, you will know exactly what she's getting to celebrate her birth. So that started somewhat of a revival. And today, the Hilgartner Stone Company, which is in South Baltimore, is going strong. If their newer projects are things like St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York, and the floor underneath the dinosaur exhibit at the Smithsonian. So if you, next time you were allowed, go down to the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History and take a look up at the great dinosaurs, but also take a look down at the floor and know that that's our own Hilgartner Stone at work. We did not get through everything we wanted today, and I think we're going to come back and do a few more, but we will see you tomorrow. Thanks.